Reading contest is back with generous awards organized by Green Dome Foundation. This year's contest features 2 books, Muhammad, His Life Based on the Earliest Sources, and The Messenger, Prophet Muhammad and His Message of Compassion. The top 11 winners in each book's contest will receive $500 each. For the young readers under 14 years, the test will be from the book Prophet Muhammad, The Age of Bliss. The first 11 children in the contest will each receive a $100 Amazon gift card. For more information, please visit www.whoisprophetmuhammad.com.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Apologies for the technical difficulties. I'll go straight, read our distinguished speaker's bio. Today we have our guest as Muneeb Nasir. He's a Muslim religious leader, writer, and interfaith activist who's respected for his knowledge and involvement in religious and current affairs. Mr. Nasir is the chair of the Olive Tree Foundation and co-chair of the National Muslim Christian Liaison Committee. He's also the executive director of the Cordoba Centre for Civic Engagement and Leadership, a collective that promotes service, dialogue, and understanding among peoples of various cultures and faiths. A member of the Muslim Advisory Board, Emmanuel College, and the managing editor of the online Canadian Muslim magazine IQRA, Canada. Educated at the University of Toronto and University of Guelph, Muneeb also has a professional certification in not-for-profit management and interfaith understanding. Muneeb Nasir, welcome to today's program.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Thank you to Salam TV for inviting me to take part in this virtual retreat. It is always a pleasure to join so many of my friends who I've known for many years. And I hope and pray that all of you joining us on this virtual retreat event are doing well and keeping safe. Let me also, as I begin, give thanks to all of those who are working to combat the COVID-19 pandemic and who are risking their own lives and their well-being for the love of their neighbors. And we also give thanks to the scientists who over this past year have collaborated to develop a vaccine in less than a year. And this is an incredible achievement, and their achievement has given us hope. And we pray that Allah, God Almighty, grants them and us the courage, compassion, and patience we need to survive these challenging times and to come out of it stronger as a more faithful people and as a more just global community. This has been a very difficult year for all of us. The COVID-19 pandemic came upon us at a time when we are already facing many challenges. We are facing and are facing the climate crisis. We are facing the rise of populism across the world. We are facing inequities in many societies and racism in many societies. And of course, many people are being driven out of their countries because of wars and conflicts. And as this pandemic rages across the world, it would be easy to lose hope. But as believers in Allah, as people of faith, we must draw strength and hope from our religious beliefs. We must draw strength from our families and our friends. For people of faith and for Muslims, this hope takes on a very special and unique dimension. Hope for Muslims brings the promise of relief and renewal, even in the midst of suffering. Because Allah tells us in the Quran, Inna ma'al usri yusra, fa inna ma'al usri yusra, surely with hardship comes ease. And we know that we will be facing tests in this world. Allah tells us in the second chapter of the Quran that we will certainly test you with fear and famine, loss of property, life, and crops. وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ. But then Allah continues in this verse and He says, وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ, give good news to those who patiently endure, to those who endure with resilience. And then He continues and He says, they are the ones who patiently endure, who will receive the blessings of Allah and His mercy. أُولَٰئِكَ عَلَيْهِمْ صَلَوَاتٌ مِّن رَبِّهِمْ وَرَحْمَةٌ. So in spite of the sufferings that we are enduring, which at times can seem very overwhelming, the flames of hope cannot be extinguished. And we should never lose hope in the mercy of Allah. لَا تَقْنَطُوا مِن رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. Do not despair of the mercy of Allah. Over this past year, I've often referred to a prophetic tradition, a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this hadith for me gives me perspective. It reminds me of the qadr of Allah and it offers reassurance. And this hadith is found as well in the collection of Imam An-Nawawi's 40 hadith collection. In this hadith, the Prophet, peace be on him, he said, be mindful of Allah and you'll find Him before you. Get to know Allah in prosperity and He will know you in adversity. Know that what has passed you by was not going to befall you, and that what has befallen you was not going to pass you by. And know that victory comes with patience, relief with affliction, and ease with hardship. This hadith for a Muslim summarizes what our position when we are facing conflicts. This evening, I've been asked to reflect on Muslim integration into North America, as well as to offer some reflections on the Hizmet movement and their role in integrating. Let me approach this topic by asking these questions. What would the early believers do if they were in our situation? What would the Prophet, peace be on him, and the early believers do if they were to move and settle in a new land? Or if they were persecuted and became refugees, forced out of their country, what would they do? Well, we don't need to speculate about these questions because we do know what they did in such situations. The early believers, they were forced out from their place of birth. And there are many lessons from their migration story, their hijrah. And this migration story was a significant move for the growth of Islam throughout that time and throughout history. And societies have always benefited when Muslims emigrate to the new society. Also, the presence and the growth of Islam in North America also came about as a result of Muslims who were brought to this continent as slaves and as a result of those who immigrated here or came as refugees. As we know, the Prophet, peace be on him, and the early companions had to leave their homes. They had to leave their possessions and their relatives in Mecca for the sake of Allah. The early companions migrated to a different city, to a different environment, to a new culture that the majority had not experienced before. And they had to integrate into a new culture and environment and to start their lives afresh. And the Prophet, peace be on him, acknowledged the difficulty of this migration, of people having to leave their homes. So we know that he paired each new migrant, the muhajir, with an ansar, one of their Medinan hosts. And this reminds me of a program that we have in Canada. You know, in Canada, we have the private sponsorship program, where the Canadian government encourages Canadians, citizens, to sponsor refugees and support them financially and otherwise for 1 year, at least for 1 year. This is exactly what the Prophet ﷺ did, because he recognized the difficulty of integration into a new society. But the Prophet, peace be on him, taught us that hijrah is not limited just to that hijrah, or to just a physical move from an unsafe place to a safe place. One day a man came to the Prophet, peace be on him, and he said, "O Messenger of Allah, which emigration is best? Which emigration is best? Which hijrah is best?" And the Prophet, peace be on him, replied, "To leave what your Lord dislikes." One of the things that the early believers had to do was to distinguish between the Islamic teachings and their culture. When the Prophet, peace be on him, emigrated, he broke with his own tribe, demonstrating to us that tribal and national loyalties were insignificant compared to the bonds of Islam. That precedence has to be given to the Islamic principles. The hijrah of the early believers required that the first Muslims were to remain faithful to the meaning of the Islamic teachings in spite of changing place and culture, in spite of moving to a new place. And Medina had new customs. For the people who emigrated, the early believers, it was a land with new customs, new types of social relationships, a wholly different role for women. It was a more complex tribal society. As well, there were influential Jewish tribes and Christian communities. And the Prophet, peace be on him, taught his companions to remain faithful to the Islamic teachings while learning to adopt a flexible and critical approach to their Meccan culture. And this is an important lesson for us in North America. As a result, these early believers had to reform some of their attitudes, which were more cultural than Islamic. For instance, and we know this incident, when the Prophet, peace be on him, learned that a wedding was to take place among the Muslims in Medina, he sent 2 singing girls to them. For he said the Ansar, the believers in Medina, enjoyed singing. Not only did the Prophet recognize this unique cultural feature or taste of the people of Medina, which was not opposed to the Islamic principles, but he integrated it to enrich the Muslim community in Medina. A lesson we can take from this early Muslim community is that to successfully integrate, we must be able to distinguish what we brought with us from our cultures, from Islam, from religion, when necessary. So we should see hijrah as an experience of liberation, where we must question ourselves, who we are and who we want to be in this new society. Now, the second lesson that you can take from this hijrah of the early Muslims is understanding our why, understanding our mission in this society, understanding why we are here. You see, the early Muslims, they understood clearly that they were placed in this position in Medina by Allah to accompany the Prophet, peace be on him. When you read about the companions of the Prophet, peace be on him, we see something quite extraordinary. These were men and women, young people who transformed themselves and their societies, and eventually they transformed the world. Yet when you read about them, they were among the most deprived of the society. Many of them were from among the poorest segments of society. Many of them were destitute. Some of them were slaves. Yet today we remember their names. We remember their names for their monumental faith and for their achievements. We have named ourselves after them. We have named ourselves after them and our children after them. But in today's world, many of us would consider them to be outcasts. Yet we remember and we honor Bilal ibn Rabah. We honor Salman al-Farsi. We honor that beloved companion Mu'adh ibn Jabal. We remember Sumayya and Abu Huraira. So the question we must ask ourselves is what it is that makes these men and women of such excellent character and achievement. Undoubtedly, they were blessed by Allah, chosen by Allah, and given that strength of belief and faith. But there's one factor that stands out when we read about their lives. They understood their why. They understood their sense of mission. They understood the mission that they had. They understood their time and place that they were in and what was expected of them. They understood and believed that Allah had chosen them, placed them at that time, at that place to accompany the Prophet, to live and communicate the final revelation to humanity. They understood their mission. They were companions of the Prophet, peace be on him, whom Allah had commissioned. And in the Quran, Allah addresses the Prophet directly and he says, "O Prophet, we have sent you as a witness, as a bringer of good tidings, as a warner, and as a summoner unto Allah by his permission, and as a lamp spreading light. Ya ayyuhan nabiyyu inna arsalnaka shahidan wa mubashiran wa nadhira wa da'iyan ila Allahi bi idhnihi wa sirajan munira." So they had this sense of mission, of being witnesses to humanity. They had this sense of mission that they had within their possession the final revelation, the universal values, carrying these higher values to the rest of humanity. You know, I was recently watching an episode of Heartstrings of Hoja Effendi, Fethullah Gulen. And this is the latest episode I think he has, it's on a YouTube channel. And Fethullah Gulen, he speaks about this sense of mission. He calls it the burden of responsibility. The burden of responsibility that Muslims have wherever they go. And he lamented, he says, "We have not been able to represent Islam in the right way and be exemplary in action and conduct. Therefore, those that we meet and engage with do not accept us and do not believe." What Fethullah Gulen is speaking of is this sense of mission that the early believers had and we may have lost. So as Muslims living in this continent, we must know that we are not here by chance. It is the plan of Allah. It is the plan of Allah. He has brought us here to this land at this time, in these circumstances, when there are great changes happening in the world. And we must know and feel that we are the trustees of the final divine revelation, which we must witness to the world. We must be shuhada al-nas, witnesses to humanity. Furthermore, each one of us must feel that we have something to contribute and that we are here to make this society a better society. We should have this feeling that Islam has to be communicated through me, that Islam has to be communicated through me. We should feel that Allah has brought us here to this land so that we can communicate this final message to the people of this land. So integration is not just about blending into society. For Muslims, there's a greater demand on us. It is the burden of responsibility that we have. And I'm proposing, this is what I'm saying, it's a smart integration. And this smart integration requires us to question who we want to be in this North America and asking ourselves why we are here. Intercultural and interfaith relationships become quite important now. And I think we are seeing it over this past year. The necessity of not only dialoguing, but having, this dialogue of action. There's a theological dialogue, but there's also the dialogue of action. So we have to be able to open ourselves up, not feel threatened or we have this inferiority complex that we may not have the skill sets or the knowledge to integrate and to interact with other members of the society. One of the most important things to strengthen our faith is to open ourselves up. Because when we start opening ourselves up, we have to question some of the integral parts of our beliefs and our practices. And this improves our practice of Islam as well. So I think it's opening ourselves up to the wider society and going out there not only for dialoguing, but also a dialogue of action, having common projects.
Wonderful, thank you. And well, our audience is welcome to write their questions in the chat part on the right-hand side of your YouTube video. Another question comes to mind, which is like you've been in this interfaith work for so many years. What are the best practices that you'd like to share for better integration to the wider society? You have elaborated a little bit. And you beautifully said, it's a kind of a continuous work. And that Muslims have to be in a state of continuous migration, getting closer to God. Now, as we have migrated from a place, from the country of origin, but better leave that behind and then be deep-rooted in our society and being in close contact with the larger society. What are the some of the best practices that you might share to better integrate for our youth and ourselves?
I just want to clarify, I'm not saying leave your culture totally, but take the best of your culture and enrich the society that you're in. I know in America you have this concept of the melting pot, where in America everyone is expected to leave aside some of the things that they came with and sort of meld and blend and become part of the melting pot. In Canada we have what we call multiculturalism, where we are encouraged to practice our cultures and hopefully to enrich the society. So I think one of the things we should be looking at strategically is how, can we enrich the community and what are the areas we can enrich the society in. There are many things many values that we have that are now coming to the fore, the values of generosity and hospitality that Muslims throughout the world are known for. One of the things that we bring with us from wherever we came is that Muslims tend to be very generous, both financially and otherwise. It's now being revealed and understood that in Western societies, some of the biggest donors are from the Muslim community. And the donation in terms of financial resources is coming now from the Muslim community. But also, we have the areas of giving back, not only financially, but in helping people. And some of the younger people now in this past year have gone out of their way to show this sort of generosity. In Toronto here, there are a number of projects that started from within the Muslim community and has been adopted by the wider community. There was a project of the Good Neighbor Project where a group of young people started delivering groceries to those in need and those who can't leave their homes. And this was adopted by the wider society. We also have similar projects of Muslim doctors coming together and doing projects that are now being adopted by the wider society. So there are many skill sets that we have, because generally, the Muslims in North America tend to be more highly educated. We tend to be in professions such as the medical field, in the engineering field, where we are sort of excelling, and we can use these as avenues to sort of to demonstrate to the society that we're living in that we can, that Muslims are not alien to the society, that we can, integrate well into the society.
Well, thank you. Now, in the beginning of your talk, you said you'd like to talk a little bit about Hizmet and what it's doing. And after that, we'll open up with the Q&A, hopefully. We have some questions coming in, streaming in through our YouTube chat. Okay. So please.
I just want to sort of conclude this section on integration. A few years ago, I attended a lecture at the museum in Toronto, the Royal Ontario Museum. And there was an expert who was speaking on ceramics. And he was giving a presentation on the technology and progress in the early Islamic world, a ceramic case study. So he was basically looking at the Islamic world in the golden era through the lens of ceramics as such, right? And he identified key elements, he said, that led to the great contributions of Muslims to human civilization. And he identified 4 things. He said that wherever Muslims went, they embraced everything that was good. They embraced everything that was good. They adopted it. They improved on it. And they gave it back selflessly to the world in the service of God. These 4 elements, he said, distinguish the early Muslims. This is integration, actually. It deals with some of the questions that was just asked. He says they went everywhere that they went, they embraced everything good. They adopted it. They improved on it, and they gave it back selflessly to the world in the service of God. So this actually, if you were to have a 4-point program of integration for Muslims, this is the 4 points that we should include. These 4 points of taking the best in the society, improving it, giving it back, and doing it selflessly in the service of Allah. So the early Muslims, they had this sort of sense of mission, this sense of purpose, knowing why they were in that society. So let me deal briefly. I was asked, when I was sent this topic, to look at Hizmet and some of the qualities or attributes of its members that's well suited to integrate well into the North American society and to contribute to the society. Now, one of the key things of Hizmet over the last 5 or 6 decades, as a transnational movement that has been working across the globe, has been promoting service to humanity, education, communal harmony, as well as promoting empathy and altruism. One feature of Hizmet and the teachings of Fethullah Gulen is that he has been able to reconcile Islam with modernity. He's been able to show that Islam does not have a problem with the Western world or with the modern world. He's shown that Islam is compatible to the best aspects of the Western society. And not only that, but it can make a significant contribution to the West. And this is an important point because, we're living in a continent which has been quite, promoting at times negative images of Muslims. And here the Hizmet members are coming with this understanding of, that Islam doesn't have a difficulty, or the practice of Islam doesn't have a difficulty with the society that they're living in. So the Hizmet members are not conflicted. They're not conflicted about their presence in the West or in North America. And this should make it easier for members to integrate into the society. Secondly, another distinguishing feature of the movement is the high level of voluntarism, or the high level of altruistic giving that has been part of the movement. Indeed, the movement is known as Hizmet or Khidmah or service, the selfless service without expectations of any rewards or favors. So this focus on selfless service is especially important in this continent, And it's especially important because the level of volunteerism is quite low now. It's going down within the general society. And I think Hizmet members probably have a higher percentage of people volunteering than the general Muslim community. So you come with this sense of giving back, of volunteering on projects in the community. And this should make it easier as well for you to interact and integrate within the Muslim community and the wider community. But the most important feature is this intercultural and interfaith dialogue. You know, the Hizmet, as far as I can see, and I've studied some movements, is the only sort of Muslim-inspired movement with a consistent program of activities in the West in the area of interfaith and intercultural dialogue. I think Hizmet is the only one that I can think of that comes specifically with this as one of the key objectives, intercultural and interfaith dialogue. You know, we're living in very difficult times when the perception and the image of Islam and Muslims are negative. And there's an urgent need for activities where people get to know each other and where they can meet and engage in dialogue. One of the things in sort of the general Muslim community is that, you know, those who came within the last 100 years have focused essentially on building institutions and providing religious services, whether it's a mosque, Islamic centers, or schools. And the focus on outreach or civic engagement or interfaith dialogue is not a high priority. And this is an area, I think, where Hizmet can be a major enrichment to the general Muslim community, just by bringing these activities within the Muslim community as well as to the society at large. So I think these are three areas that I've mentioned that makes it a lot easier, because you come from a sort of a history of the Ottoman Empire, that you were interacting much more widely with the Western world, and sort of ingrained within the Turkish culture to be a lot more open than many of the other Muslim cultures that have immigrated to this land. So I think these are things that makes it a lot easier for the members of Hizmet to sort of integrate or smartly integrate into the North American society. So I'll stop here, and if there are any questions on this and what I've said, I'm pleased to.
Yes, there are a couple of questions that I'd like to put forward. Hussein Salim Shen asks, we see some disagreements among mosques, and the reason is mostly being originally from different countries. What are your suggestions to be more united?
Well, I think, there's great strength in diversity. I think we are seeing it we're seeing it here in the North American Muslim community, where on this continent, we're seeing Muslims not only of different ethnicities and backgrounds, but also different understandings and approach to Islam. When we came from our home countries, we may have practiced Islam based on one school of thought. People from Turkey, generally the Hanafi school of thought, and they're now having to interact with those from the other schools of thought. And this, requires for us to be open, and it sort of enriches our Islam actually, because, when we come from one culture where everything is fairly rigid in that one understanding, and we now have to interact with others, it opens us up to sort of appreciating the diversity and the strength of Islam. Of course, there are differences. There are differences in terms of within each city and each state and province. We have difficulties. One of the challenges we have had for many centuries is that we are challenged by our diversity, and we don't look at it as a strength. I think one of the things we have lost is this idea of building consensus, which is a key element. I know Fethullah Gulen has spoken a great deal about shura, mashura, and of reviving this concept of building consensus. And I think this is vastly needed now, that within our communities, we need to sort of build consensus, knowing that we'll disagree on sort of more practical things. There may be minor theological differences, but at the end of the day, we are all Muslims believing in Allah and His Prophet. We accept the Quran. And we have to, sort of inculcate that sense of, respect and, sense of consultation amongst each other. So this is an ongoing project. It's not going to be solved overnight with objectives and constitutions. It requires Muslims to interact with each other and to learn from each other. And eventually, in many societies, there's a lot of interaction and intermarriages, and eventually the society develops a sort of a unique North American or American and Canadian Muslim culture that evolves out of it.
Wow. Well, thank you. And this is our last question, another question from Jalal Gözalan. As a new immigrant, how should North American Muslims handle the dual identity issue? What are your experiences and opinions regarding this?
Well, this is one of the challenges that we have, right? Because in these societies, they allow us to maintain our cultures. So in Canada, for instance, you can be a Canadian, Turkish, Muslim, right? You have three identities, or Canadian, Turkish, living in a specific area, and you're identified by that area. So we have these sort of hyphenated identities. And sometimes it can be difficult if it's not consciously known by Muslims that, what gives precedence. Religiously, we are Muslims. Culturally, we come from Turkey or from wherever, but now we are in Canada. And as I said at the beginning, this migration is not just a physical migration. It really requires us to be asking ourselves who we are and who we want to be. We came from a culture that's a very strong culture, from a society that's been there for centuries. And sometimes it's difficult to move, right, to a new society and sort of leave some of the things that may impede your progress as an American or as a Canadian and as a Muslim. One of the things that, one way of looking at this is if someone looks at me or looks at you and they see a Turkish person, or they see, in my case, a West Indian, a Guyanese person, they see me practicing Islam. And they say, oh, that Islam is good for him. It's good for that Turkish person, but it's not good for me. Because now, we failed in this burden of responsibility, as Hoji Effendi said, right? Because when a person looks at us, they're looking at us through this prism of our ethnicity, of our culture. So when they eat Turkish food, oh, it's good for the Turkish people, but it's not good for me. When they see Islam, it's good for those Turkish people, but it's not good for me. Right? So if we start looking at it from this prism, we'll start changing our perception. How should I project my Islam? Do I practice my Islam constantly through that prism of being a Turk, or being from Turkey, right? So you have to constantly, it's a conscious thing that we have to be engaged in, because this burden of responsibility is something very great, because on the day of judgment, you'll stand before Allah and you'll ask us, you were present in America and in Canada, what did you do? Did you give the message? Were you witnesses to people? Did they see in you a Turkish person, an Egyptian person, or did they see in you the best values of Islam? If we start looking at it from that perspective, we start questioning ourselves. And gradually we start readjusting, not dropping our Turkish culture, but at the same time, we may have to readjust a bit to make it more attractive to people in the society.
Well, thank you so much, Muneeb Nasir. MashaAllah, you elaborate and summarized wonderfully the Muslim integration in North America. So I'd like to thank again Muneeb Nasir for this talk about Muslim integration in North America. We had a Q&A session. So I'll ask everyone to rewatch this video again. It's on the YouTube channel of Salam TV. So looking forward to seeing everybody, our audience, tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Pacific Time, to be with us at this virtual Winter Spiritual Retreat Program 2020. Thank you again, Muneeb Nasir.
Thank you.